The ornament slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of my dining room. Crystal fragments scattered like my shattered expectations, each piece reflecting the empty chairs around my perfectly set Christmas table. The chandelier above cast shadows across 12 place settings that would never be filled. I had prepared everything with meticulous care, the way I had for 37 years. The turkey was golden, the wine carefully selected, the gifts wrapped in paper I'd chosen months ago. But at 3 p.m. on Christmas Day, I sat alone, my phone silent except for one devastating group message I'd discovered by accident. "Can't wait for dinner at Mom's house. See everyone at 5. It wasn't meant for me. It was Jennifer planning Christmas dinner with my children, using recipes I'd taught her in the house I'd helped them buy. My own children had replaced me without even telling me, leaving me to realize on Christmas Day that I was no longer needed, no longer wanted, no longer family. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and at 68, I thought I knew my place in this world. For 4 decades, I was the backbone of our family, the one who held everything together after my husband David passed 3 years ago. I raised 4 successful children, sacrificed my career as a nurse to support theirs, and never asked for anything but love and respect in return. My eldest, Thomas, runs a successful law firm. Sarah became a doctor, just like I always dreamed of being. Michael owns 3 restaurants, and little Amy, my baby, is now a celebrated architect. I helped them all achieve these dreams, paying for college, providing down payments for homes, babysitting grandchildren while they built their careers. This house, a sprawling colonial in Maplewood Heights, had been our family sanctuary. Every room holds memories of birthday parties, homework sessions, and holiday gatherings that seem to get smaller each year. I'd noticed the gradual change, the shorter visits, the hurried phone calls, but I'd attributed it to busy lives, not to a deliberate distancing from the woman who'd given them everything. The warning signs had been there for months, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. Last Thanksgiving, they'd arrived late and left early, claiming work obligations. When I'd suggested our annual Christmas cookie baking tradition, Sarah had laughed it off as too much work. When I'd offered to host Easter, Thomas had said they were trying something different this year. Each rejection felt like a small paper cut, painful but survivable. I'd started making excuses for them, telling myself they were establishing their own traditions, growing into independent adults. But the truth was harder to swallow. My daughter-in-law, Jennifer, had been orchestrating this exodus from my life with surgical precision. She'd convinced my children that I was too controlling, that my desire to maintain family traditions was emotional manipulation. At Jennifer's suggestion, they'd started their own group chat without me, planning gatherings I'd only hear about in passing. When I'd expressed hurt at being excluded, Jennifer had labeled me dramatic and attention-seeking, turning my own children against the woman who'd loved them unconditionally for decades. I discovered the full extent of their betrayal by accident 3 days after Christmas. The way most devastating truths are revealed, through a moment of innocent technological fumbling that tears away years of carefully constructed lies. Thomas had asked me to help transfer some legal files from his old laptop to his new one, a request that had felt like a small olive branch after the devastating Christmas silence. As I waited for the files to copy, a notification popped up on his screen. A new message in the family group chat labeled Family Planning, Mom Free Zone. The title alone stopped my heart, but curiosity and growing dread compelled me to click. What I found wasn't just evidence of their Christmas conspiracy. It was a digital archaeological site of my systematic elimination from their lives. Months and months of conversations dissecting my problematic behavior, analyzing my increasing neediness, and strategically planning how to manage Mom's expectations without guilt. The messages dated back to early November, meaning they'd been plotting my Christmas exclusion for over 2 months. Jennifer had been the architect, creating detailed psychological profiles of my motivations. She uses family traditions to emotionally manipulate us, she'd written, Every holiday becomes about her needs, not our own family development. My son Thomas, the child I'd rocked through nightmares and supported through law school anxiety, had responded with laughing, crying emojis and added, "Mom's guilt trips are legendary. Remember Easter when she cried because we left early?" Sarah, my daughter who'd called me her best friend throughout medical school, had contributed her own clinical analysis. I think she's developing some early dementia symptoms. The repetitive stories, the increased emotional reactions. We might need to start considering assisted living options sooner than expected. The cruelest part wasn't just the betrayal, it was the casual tone, the way they discussed my complete elimination from their lives with the same detached planning they might use for a vacation itinerary. Michael had suggested they gradually reduce contact until she adjusts her expectations, while Amy, my baby, had worried that I might make a scene if they were too abrupt about excluding me. The final message thread was Jennifer's masterstroke, a detailed plan to tell me Christmas was canceled due to schedule conflicts, while they proceeded with their celebration at her house, using recipes I'd spent decades perfecting and passing down to her. Thomas's response, 3 laughing emojis followed by, "Poor mom will be so confused," made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. They weren't just abandoning me, they were mocking my anticipated pain, finding entertainment in my certain heartbreak. I called Thomas immediately, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone, my voice cracking with a pain so profound I hardly recognized it as my own. When he answered with his usual casual, "Hey, Mom," as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just read months of his conspiracies against me, I felt something fundamental break inside my chest. "Thomas," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "I need you to explain the group chat called Family Planning, Mom Free Zone." The silence that followed stretched for at least 30 seconds, during which I could practically hear him calculating damage control strategies with his lawyer's mind. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted into that professional tone he used with difficult clients, clinical and deliberately calm. "Mom, you weren't supposed to see that. It's just family communication. Nothing personal against you." Nothing personal. As if systematically excluding your mother from Christmas wasn't the most personal betrayal imaginable. When I confronted him directly about the messages, he didn't deny them. He justified them with the cold logic of someone who'd spent months rehearsing these arguments. "Mom, you have to understand from our perspective, we needed space to create our own family traditions without feeling guilty about disappointing you. You've always been so intense about family gatherings, so demanding of our time and emotional energy. Jennifer suggested we might transition gradually to more independence, and honestly, it seemed like the kindest approach." The word gradually hit me like a physical slap. They'd planned my elimination like corporate downsizing, complete with transition strategies and emotional management techniques. When I asked about Christmas specifically, about how they could leave me completely alone on the most important family day of the year, he actually sighed with irritation. "We didn't want to hurt your feelings by directly canceling our traditional dinner, so we thought it would be easier to just let you figure out that plans had changed. We assumed you'd make other arrangements once you realized we weren't coming." Sarah, when I called her next, was even more coldly clinical in her dismissal of my pain. Her medical training had apparently taught her to compartmentalize emotions so efficiently she could discuss my heartbreak like a case study. "Mom, you're being overly dramatic about this. We're adults now, with our own families and responsibilities. We don't need to spend every single holiday at your house just because you've built your entire identity around being the family matriarch." When I reminded her of the decades I'd spent sacrificing my own dreams for their education and success, she actually laughed, a bitter, dismissive sound that felt like acid in my ears. "There it is," she said with Jennifer's psychological manipulation tactics clearly visible in her response. "The guilt trip that Jennifer predicted you'd use. This is exactly why we needed distance from your emotional manipulation. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own children had been coached to reinterpret my love as manipulation, my sacrifices as selfish control tactics, my desire for family connection as pathological neediness. The calls to Michael and Amy yielded variations of the same devastating theme: psychological manipulation disguised as mature boundary setting. Michael, always the quiet middle child, had apparently found his voice in cruelty, explaining with rehearsed patience that family obligations shouldn't feel like obligations, and that I needed to respect their autonomy as adults. Amy, my baby who'd called me Mama until she was 12, delivered the final blow with Jennifer's clinical language. "We love you, Mom, but love doesn't mean we have to sacrifice our own mental health to manage your emotional needs." By the time I'd hung up from that last devastating conversation, Christmas night had descended into a blur of tears, wine, and the kind of soul-deep loneliness that makes you question your own reality. My beautiful dinner grew cold and congealed as I sat surrounded by the ghosts of celebrations past, each empty chair a testament to my complete failure as a mother. I walked through each room of the house like a ghost myself, remembering when these walls contained laughter instead of echoes. When the kitchen saw Jennifer learning my grandmother's stuffing recipe with genuine enthusiasm instead of strategic information gathering. The living room where we'd opened presents for decades now felt like a mausoleum of dead traditions, each family photo on the mantel mocking me with images of children who'd grown up to orchestrate my elimination with corporate efficiency. The devastating irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years patiently teaching Jennifer every family recipe, every tradition, every meaningful ritual that made our holidays special, never imagining she was collecting intelligence to replace me entirely. My phone remained completely silent throughout the evening. No calls to check if their elderly mother was okay after being abandoned on Christmas. No apologies for the misunderstanding. No acknowledgement that they'd left the woman who'd given them life sitting alone with a feast for 12. The silence was more deafening than any argument, more final than any angry words could have been. By midnight, as I finally began clearing the elaborate spread I'd prepared with such hopeful care, I felt something crystallizing inside me that hadn't existed before, something harder and more determined than the soft, accommodating woman I'd been for 68 years. This wasn't an accident, a miscommunication, or a temporary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, premeditated rejection by the 4 people I'd loved more than life itself, executed with military precision and celebrated with emoji laughter. They'd traded their mother's unconditional love for their daughter-in-law's approval, and they'd done it without a moment's genuine hesitation or remorse. In the pre-dawn darkness, surrounded by the ruins of my holiday dreams and a lifetime of maternal devotion, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being invisible, done being convenient, done being taken for granted. The woman who'd spent decades enabling their selfishness was about to show them exactly what they'd chosen to throw away. The day after Christmas, with my house still reeking of untouched feast and broken dreams, I called Helen Richardson, my closest friend from nursing school and the only person who'd never judged my devotion to my ungrateful children. Helen had been watching my family's dysfunction from the sidelines for years, biting her tongue as I made excuse after excuse for their increasingly selfish behavior. When I finally told her what had happened, the silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Margaret," she finally said, her voice heavy with a mixture of relief and sadness, "I've been waiting 15 years for you to see what everyone else could see. Jennifer has been isolating you systematically, turning your children against you with surgical precision. Your children have been taking advantage of your generosity for so long, they've forgotten it's not an entitlement." Her words hit like physical blows, but they carried the ring of truth I'd been avoiding. Helen drove over within the hour, armed with tissues, wine, and the phone number of Dr. Patricia Wells, a family therapist who specialized in parental estrangement and elder emotional abuse. Patricia saved my friend Dorothy when her son was draining her retirement account," Helen explained. She understands family manipulation better than anyone. Dr. Wells listened to my story during our first session with professional compassion that made me feel heard for the first time in months. Her office walls were lined with books about toxic families, narcissistic abuse, and emotional manipulation, subjects I'd never imagined would apply to my loving family. "Margaret," she said gently after I'd finished recounting the Christmas betrayal, "you've enabled their behavior by always giving without boundaries, without consequences. They've learned to take your love for granted because it came without conditions or limits." The phrase enabling stung because it implied I was partly responsible for my own mistreatment. Dr. Wells recommended I read Emotional Blackmail by Susan Forward and Will I Ever Be Good Enough by Carol McBride, books that would become my roadmap to understanding the psychological warfare my own family had waged against me. That night, I sat in David's old chair reading about love bombing, gaslighting, and scapegoating, finding my family's behavior patterns described with clinical accuracy on every page. The literature was devastating in its precision, describing exactly the cycle of guilt, blame shifting, and gradual isolation I'd experienced without recognizing. For the first time, I had vocabulary for what had been done to me, and more importantly, I had hoped that I could choose a radically different response than the passive acceptance that had defined my relationships for decades. 3 days later, I sat across from Robert Chen, my financial advisor of 20 years, feeling like a forensic accountant about to examine a crime scene. Robert had been diplomatically suggesting for years that I might be overly generous with my children, but I'd always dismissed his concerns as cold-hearted financial planning. Now, requesting a comprehensive analysis of every dollar I'd given them over the past 15 years felt like an archaeological dig into my own willful blindness. The spreadsheet Robert prepared was a testament to maternal devotion taken to financially ruinous extremes. Thomas alone had received $247,000, law school tuition, bar exam fees, his first house down payment, the loan to start his practice that was never repaid, Jennifer's medical bills during her difficult pregnancies, and countless temporary loans for vacations, home improvements, and investment opportunities that somehow never materialized. Sarah's medical education had cost me $198,000, plus the down payment on her practice, her luxury car when she needed to look successful for patients, and the elaborate wedding that had maxed out my credit cards. Michael's restaurant ventures had consumed $231,000 of my retirement funds, sold to me as investments that would pay dividends but had only generated more requests for capital. Even Amy, my baby, had received $171,000 for architecture school, her first apartment, and the art supplies for her freelance business that never quite took off. "Margaret," Robert said gently, his voice carrying the weight of financial reality, "you're 68 years old with less than $200,000 remaining in your retirement accounts, living in a house worth $1.2 million that you've remortgaged twice to fund their dreams. You've been systematically depleting your future security to subsidize 4 fully grown adults who've never expressed gratitude or shown financial responsibility." The numbers stared back at me from the page like an indictment of my own stupidity. I'd sacrificed my financial security, my retirement comfort, and my peace of mind to fund lavish lifestyles for children who'd repaid my generosity with calculated exclusion. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I owned the one asset they all coveted desperately, the family home they'd grown up in and assumed they'd inherit. Thomas had already made several comments about how the house would be perfect for his expanding family. Sarah had suggested multiple times that I add her to the deed for estate planning purposes and tax advantages. They'd positioned themselves like elegant vultures, circling patiently while maintaining their loving facades, waiting for me to die so they could claim their prize. But I was very much alive, finally awakening to my own power in this twisted equation. And the house they wanted so desperately was mine to give, sell, or burn down if I chose. I spent the next 3 weeks developing a comprehensive response to their betrayal, approaching it with the methodical precision of a military campaign. Every move was calculated, every decision researched, every consequence anticipated. This wasn't about revenge, though I won't pretend that element wasn't satisfying. This was about justice, about teaching 4 ungrateful adults that actions have consequences, especially when those actions involve betraying the woman who'd sacrificed everything for their success. My first call was to Elizabeth Murphy, a top estate attorney whose reputation for protecting elderly clients from family exploitation was legendary in legal circles. Elizabeth's office walls were lined with awards and testimonials from clients who'd successfully defended themselves against greedy relatives, and her initial consultation revealed exactly how precarious my situation had become. "Margaret, what you're describing is textbook elder financial abuse, even though it's technically legal," she explained, reviewing the mountain of documentation I'd assembled. "Your children have systematically drained your resources while positioning themselves to inherit your remaining asset. We need to protect what you have left and make sure they understand that betraying you comes with a price." Together, we crafted new estate documents that were legal masterpieces of conditional inheritance. My children would receive nothing unless they met specific requirements for reconciliation, public acknowledgement of their treatment of me, family therapy sessions, and a 1-year period of consistent, respectful contact. The house, their ultimate prize, would be sold immediately, with proceeds establishing the Whitmore Foundation for Abandoned Elderly. Elizabeth's eyes gleamed with professional satisfaction as she explained how airtight the documents were. "Even if they contest this, which they probably will, the psychological evaluations and evidence of their conspiracy will make their case nearly impossible to win." I also hired Marcus Thompson, a private investigator who specialized in documenting family dynamics for legal proceedings. Within days, Marcus had compiled a devastating portfolio of evidence: screenshots of their group chat planning my exclusion, restaurant receipts showing their Christmas dinner without me, even social media posts celebrating their family tradition at Jennifer's house using my recipes. "This level of premeditation is unusual," Marcus noted. "Most family conflicts are emotional and spontaneous. Your children planned your exclusion like a corporate restructuring." Finally, I engaged Sandra Williams, a public relations consultant who specialized in crisis management for families facing public scrutiny. Sandra's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. If my successful children were horrified by private consequences, they'd be absolutely devastated by public exposure. Your son's law firm, your daughter's medical practice, your other son's restaurants, they all depend on reputation and community standing, she explained. The story of successful professionals who abandoned their elderly mother for convenience will write itself if this goes public. Every piece was falling into place, each element designed to show my children exactly who they'd chosen to betray and what that betrayal would cost them. The woman who'd spent decades enabling their selfishness was about to teach them that maternal love, once poisoned by cruelty, could transform into something far more formidable than they'd ever imagined. The woman who emerged from this process was someone I barely recognized, and neither did anyone else. Standing before my bathroom mirror after my appointment with celebrity stylist Victoria Chen, I saw a stranger staring back. The dowdy, invisible mother had vanished, replaced by an elegant woman with silver hair styled in a sophisticated bob, subtle but expert makeup, and clothes that actually fit my body rather than hiding it. "You've been beautiful all along," Victoria had said. "You just forgot how to see it." The transformation went deeper than appearance. Dr. Wells helped me understand that my identity had become so enmeshed with being the perfect mother that I'd completely lost sight of Margaret Whitmore as an individual. "You've spent 46 years asking, 'What do they need?' instead of, 'What do I want?'" she observed during one of our sessions. For the first time in decades, I joined social groups purely for my own pleasure. The watercolor class revealed a hidden artistic talent that surprised everyone, including myself. My painting of the winter garden sold at the first student exhibition for $500, money I spent entirely on myself without guilt. The book club introduced me to fascinating people who valued my thoughts and opinions, who listened when I spoke instead of waiting for their turn to make demands. James Patterson, a retired literature professor with kind eyes and gentle hands, began asking me to coffee after our discussions of contemporary fiction. Our conversations revealed shared passions for travel, art, classical music, and philosophical debates that my children had never cared to explore. When he first touched my hand across the cafe table, I felt something I'd thought was dead forever: desire. At 68, I was discovering that life's second act could be more vibrant than its first. 3 weeks after Christmas, I invited all my children to Sunday dinner, sending individual invitations that made it clear this would be a significant family meeting. They arrived with the casual arrogance of people who assumed nothing had fundamentally changed, that their mother would simply absorb their cruelty and continue serving their needs. Jennifer accompanied Thomas, her presence at my table a calculated insult given her role in orchestrating my exclusion. She wore the pearl necklace I'd given her for her birthday, an irony that wasn't lost on me. I served dinner with perfect grace, using my finest china and crystal, allowing them to fill their stomachs with prime rib and roasted vegetables while they discussed their successful careers and growing families as if I were merely expensive catering staff. "The restaurant is expanding to a second location," Michael announced proudly. "Sarah's practice has a 6-month waiting list," Thomas added, beaming at his sister. Throughout dinner, they performed their success for me, expecting praise and admiration while offering none of the warmth or inclusion they so freely gave each other. When dessert was cleared and coffee served, I placed a thick manila folder on the table and opened it deliberately, the sound cutting through their chatter like a blade. "Before we continue," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "I want to share something with all of you." The shift in atmosphere was immediate, their jovial mood evaporating as they sensed the gravity in my tone. "These are comprehensive bank statements showing exactly $847,000 I've given you over the past 15 years. I spread the documents across the table like evidence in a courtroom. Here are copies of your group text messages discussing how to exclude me from Christmas while planning to gather at Jennifer's house using my recipes." Thomas's face went ashen. Sarah's fork clattered to her plate, and Jennifer's mask began to crack. "I'm not finished," I continued, as Thomas tried to interrupt. "I've documented every gift, every loan, every sacrifice I made for your dreams while you planned my exclusion from your lives. You treated your mother like a bank account with emotions, and now it's time to balance the books." Jennifer was the first to break, her carefully constructed facade crumbling as she leaned forward with venom in her voice. "You manipulative old woman," she snarled. "We knew you'd use money to control us eventually. This is exactly why we needed distance from your toxic guilt trips." Her words hung in the air like poison, revealing the depth of contempt she'd hidden beneath years of fake smiles and borrowed recipes. The woman who'd called me Mom for 8 years, who'd cried on my shoulder during her miscarriages, who'd asked me to teach her my grandmother's Christmas traditions, had just shown her true face. Thomas didn't defend me. Instead, he leaned forward with his lawyer's calculating expression, already strategizing damage control. "Mom, what exactly do you want from us? What's your endgame here?" His question proved everything I'd feared. He saw our relationship as a transaction, a negotiation, not a bond of love. I smiled at him with genuine sadness, remembering the little boy who'd once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. "I want nothing from you, Thomas, nothing at all. You've already shown me exactly who you are, and it's not the man I thought I raised." I opened the second folder with theatrical precision, revealing the new estate documents Elizabeth Murphy had prepared. "This house, which you've all mentioned coveting in various conversations over the years, will be sold within the month. The proceeds will establish the Whitmore Foundation for Abandoned Elderly, ensuring that other parents won't suffer the fate you've chosen for me." Sarah gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat as she finally understood the financial implications. "Mom, you can't be serious. We made a mistake, but this is completely extreme. Think about the grandchildren's futures." "The grandchildren," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of her manipulation. "The same grandchildren you use as weapons when you want something, but who I'm not allowed to see unless it's convenient for you. Those grandchildren." Michael, my quiet middle son who'd said nothing all evening, finally found his voice. "We can contest this legally, Mom. You're being vindictive and irrational. Any court will see this as an emotional reaction, not sound judgment." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me with its clarity. "Contest it if you like. Michael, Elizabeth Murphy is one of the finest estate attorneys in the state. Everything I've done is completely legal and thoroughly documented. Unlike your treatment of me, which borders on elder abuse according to the legal definitions I've recently studied." The aftermath was swift and uglier than I'd anticipated, though not surprising. Jennifer screamed that I was a bitter, vindictive old woman destroying an entire family over one misunderstanding, conveniently rewriting history to minimize their months of calculated exclusion. She stood up so violently, her chair toppled backward, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "You've poisoned this family with your neediness for years, and now you're punishing us for finally setting healthy boundaries." The irony of her using therapy language to justify cruelty wasn't lost on me. Thomas threatened immediate legal action, his professional demeanor completely shattered as he revealed the entitled child beneath the expensive suit. "This won't stand, Mother. We'll prove you're mentally incompetent, that you're making irrational decisions based on emotional manipulation." Sarah alternated between tears and rage, her medical training apparently not extending to emotional intelligence. "How could you do this to your own grandchildren?" Emma asks about Grandma's house all the time. "You're destroying their sense of family security." Only Amy, my youngest, sat quietly with tears streaming down her face, and I wondered if her silence came from genuine remorse or just the shock of finally facing consequences. They stormed out collectively, their expensive cars departing my driveway like a funeral procession for our family's death. Within hours, my phone became a weapon of psychological warfare. Angry voicemails filled with blame and accusations, text messages threatening legal action, and even attempts at emotional blackmail through my grandchildren. "Grandma, Mommy says you don't love us anymore," came an obviously coached message from Emma, Sarah's 8-year-old. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost pathetic. But the pain of being used as a pawn cut deep nonetheless. I blocked their numbers one by one, each deletion feeling like removing a splinter from my heart that had festered for too long. That evening, Helen arrived with champagne instead of wine, her face radiant with something I hadn't seen in years, pride in her friend. "How do you feel?" she asked as we sat in my living room, the space no longer haunted by memories but peaceful in its quiet. "Free," I answered, raising my glass to toast the woman I was becoming. For the first time in decades, completely and utterly free. The house sold faster than expected to a lovely young family who appreciated its character and history. Watching them walk through the rooms with excitement rather than entitlement felt like redemption. I moved into a stunning condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows, a modern kitchen I'd designed myself, and no ghosts of family memories haunting every corner. The Whitmore Foundation became my purpose, helping elderly people navigate family estrangement and financial abuse. My story, shared at support groups, inspired dozens of others to recognize their own worth and set appropriate boundaries. James Patterson's friendship deepened into something I hadn't expected at my age: romance. We traveled to Italy, something David and I had always planned to do someday. We attended theater performances, visited art galleries, and had conversations that lasted hours without anyone demanding my attention for their crises. My social calendar filled with activities I'd chosen because they interested me, not because they served someone else's needs. For the first time since becoming a mother at 22, I was living for myself, and the feeling was intoxicating. My children's friends began reaching out, expressing shock at learning how their perfect family had treated me. Several offered to testify about my children's behavior if needed, though legal action never materialized. 6 months after our devastating confrontation, Amy called from a blocked number, her voice barely above a whisper and shaking with emotion. She was the only one who'd attempted genuine contact since that horrible Sunday dinner, and her words carried the weight of authentic remorse rather than strategic manipulation. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you ever again, but I need you to know that I see what we did, really see it. Jennifer manipulated all of us, but that doesn't excuse my choices. I participated in your emotional abandonment, and I've been sick with guilt every single day since." Unlike the others who'd sent legal threats and demands for their rightful inheritance, Amy asked for nothing except the opportunity to apologize face to face. She'd left the family group chat, confronted Thomas and Sarah about their treatment of me, and even ended her friendship with Jennifer despite the social cost. "I've been in therapy trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could hurt the woman who sacrificed everything for my happiness," she continued, her voice breaking. I don't expect forgiveness, and I certainly don't expect you to trust me again, but I want to try to earn back even a small place in your life if you'll allow it." After months of my own therapy and soul-searching, I agreed to meet her at a neutral cafe downtown, my heart hammering as I prepared to face the child who'd been my baby for 28 years. Seeing Amy again nearly destroyed me. She looked exhausted, aged by guilt and the realization of what they'd collectively thrown away. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loose on her frame. "And I don't expect immediate forgiveness," she said, before we'd even ordered coffee. "But I want to spend whatever time you'll give me proving that I can be the daughter you deserved all along." Our reconciliation was painstakingly slow and careful, built on acknowledgement of harm done rather than excuses or justifications. Amy began volunteering at the foundation, working directly with elderly clients and witnessing firsthand the devastating impact that family abandonment creates. She never once asked about the inheritance, the house, or whether her siblings might be forgiven. Her focus remained laser-sharp on rebuilding our relationship one honest conversation at a time. "I understand now," she said during one of our monthly dinners. "You didn't just lose your children that Christmas. We stole your sense of worth, your belief that you mattered. I can't undo that damage, but I can spend my life making sure you never doubt your value again." A year and a half later, I stood at the podium of the Grand Ballroom at the Meridian Hotel, looking out at an audience of over 300 people whose lives had been touched by elder abandonment and family financial abuse. The Whitmore Foundation's annual gala had become the city's most important fundraising event for elderly rights, with a waiting list for tables and media coverage that had sparked national conversations about family responsibility and elder dignity. Amy sat in the front row, her presence both redemptive and bittersweet, a living reminder of what was lost and what might still be saved. Beside her sat James, my partner in life and love, whose steady presence had taught me that romance after 60 could be deeper and more meaningful than anything I'd experienced in youth. 18 months ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's acoustics. My 4 children left me alone on Christmas Day to have dinner together without me, using recipes I'd taught my daughter-in-law in a house I'd helped them buy. That betrayal shattered my heart, but it also broke me free from a lifetime of invisible servitude. The applause was thunderous and sustained, a room full of people who understood betrayal and had chosen healing over bitterness. The Whitmore Foundation has helped over 400 elderly people recognize their worth, set boundaries, and find community beyond toxic family relationships. We've prevented millions in financial scams, stopped dozens of emotional abuse situations, and most importantly, we've proven that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. This is what rising from the ashes of betrayal looks like. After the speech, James took my hand as we moved through the crowd of supporters, many of whom had become dear friends bound by shared experience and mutual respect. Dorothy Chen, our first client, now served on the board and had started her own support group for financial abuse survivors. Several of my children's former friends approached throughout the evening, expressing continued shock at learning how the perfect Whitmore family had treated their devoted mother. Thomas, Sarah, and Michael had never contacted me again, apparently preferring their collective anger to the vulnerability required for accountability and growth. But Amy had built something entirely new with me, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than maternal obligation and filial entitlement. At 69, I had learned that family isn't always biological, that love without reciprocity is servitude, not relationship, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the absolute refusal to accept less than we deserve. The woman who had been abandoned and forgotten on Christmas had not just survived, she had thrived, creating a legacy that would protect countless others from the pain she had endured. As James and I danced to the evening's final song, surrounded by friends who chose to love me rather than use me, I felt complete in a way that had nothing to do with biological family and everything to do with chosen community, genuine respect, and hard-won self-worth.